Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Today, we'll talk about a group that, despite their brief screen time, left an indelible mark on the hearts of fans. The Marauders. James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew. 4 friends who, in their time, caused quite a stir within the walls of Hogwarts. Their mischief, secrets, and loyalty inspired us, amused us, and raised quite a few questions. Too many inconsistencies, too many impossibilities. Let's take a closer look at where magic ends and narrative convenience begins. Enjoy the video. Number 1. How did they create the Marauders map? The Marauders map is one of the most mysterious artifacts in the Harry Potter universe. That cheeky piece of parchment marked with, "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good," could show not just the layout of Hogwarts, but the exact real-time location of anyone within its walls, even if they were hidden under an invisibility cloak or disguised with polyjuice potion. Its creators? The Marauders themselves. Supposedly just a few clever, reckless teenagers. But let's be realistic. Even Hermione, one of the brightest witches of her generation, never managed anything remotely similar. How did a group of schoolboys not only explore every secret of the castle, but also enchant a map with highly advanced identity-tracking magic? Was it the product of unprecedented brilliance, or simply a narrative convenience? Perhaps someone more powerful was helping behind the scenes. That question remains open. Number 2. How did they become animagi? The story of 3 teenagers transforming into animals to support their werewolf friend sounds like a touching legend. But dig a little deeper, and cracks begin to show. Becoming an animagus is extremely difficult and dangerous. The Ministry of Magic recorded only 7 animagi in the entire 20th century. Yes, there were a few unregistered ones like Rita Skeeter, but they were rare exceptions. The transformation process itself is grueling. Just one step involves holding a mandrake leaf in your mouth for an entire month. And that's just the beginning. One mistake, and you start over. So how did James, Sirius, and Peter manage this at school under their teachers' noses with no accidents or suspicions? How did they synchronize their transformations so precisely for Lupin's safety? And how did they keep it all secret? Either we're looking at prodigies of magical innovation, or another case of plot first, logic later. Number 3. Why didn't Lupin take the potion? The climax of The Prisoner of Azkaban hinges on a single oversight. Lupin forgot to take his potion. Wolfsbane potion is a lifeline for werewolves. It lets them keep their mind during full moon transformations. Lupin, a responsible adult and seasoned sufferer of lycanthropy, just forgot. The one slip allows Pettigrew to escape, the plot to leap forward, and the time travel sequence to begin, leading to Buckbeak's rescue. Yes, you could blame stress or emotional overload, but that's a flimsy explanation. It almost feels like the script forgot who Remus Lupin is. Number 4. How did Fred and George not notice Pettigrew? Before Harry had the map, Fred and George did. They knew how it worked. They used it to monitor professors, students, and undoubtedly their own brothers. Teasing Ron was practically tradition. So here's the question. How did they not notice that someone named Peter Pettigrew was always shown next to Ron? A name that had been listed as dead for years. It should have jumped off the page every time they looked. But it's nothing. They didn't notice, didn't ask, didn't care. Either the map wasn't as accurate as we're told, or the twins displayed spectacular obliviousness, or we were just meant to go along with it. Number 5. How did Dumbledore explain the Whomping Willow? Dumbledore is a complex figure. His methods often resemble a chess game where real people are the pawns. But even so, how did he explain to students, parents, the ministry, and the Hogwarts Board of Governors the presence of a violent, bone-crushing tree on school grounds? The Whomping Willow was essential. It concealed the passage to the Shrieking Shack, where Lupin transformed. Fine. But Hogwarts is not a private playground. It's a state-regulated institution. Any parental complaint or injured student could have launched an investigation, and yet no one ever asked. Or did Dumbledore simply make the problem disappear? Another convenient gap that only works in the logic of a magical fairy tale. Number 6. Where did Sirius get a wand? After escaping Azkaban, Sirius Black appears as a fully functioning wizard, casting spells, transforming, even fighting. But here's the snag. Where did he get a wand? He couldn't have walked into Ollivander's. He was a wanted man. His original wand was likely confiscated by the Ministry. And as we've been told repeatedly, you can't just use any wand, the wand chooses the wizard. But Sirius wasn't using some random stick. He cast spells with strength, precision, and ease. So what wand was this? His original, retrieved in secret? A new one crafted underground? Or just another detail the script forgot? Number 7. Why didn't they suspect Pettigrew's betrayal? Peter Pettigrew was always in their shadow. James was the leader, Sirius the daredevil, Remus the thinker. Peter followed. He laughed at the jokes, copied their homework, hid behind them in duels. But when the war began, he was the one they chose to hold the most dangerous secret. Sirius trusted him so much he told no one about the switch. "I suggested the change," he later confessed to Harry. "It seemed the perfect plan." No one suspected the quiet one. Maybe that was Peter's true magic, his invisibility. He made himself so small that even his friends stopped looking closely. The Marauders could map out an entire castle with magical precision, but failed to read the heart of the person beside them. Pettigrew didn't need to be a great wizard, he just had to wait. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Remus whispers, "He's a rat," and not just literally. The betrayal had been there all along. They just never thought to look. Number 8. How did Snape know Sectum Sempra before he invented it? In Order of the Phoenix, the memory flashes fast. James Potter flipping Severus upside down, laughter ringing through the courtyard, and Snape, humiliated, trying to fight back. But sharp-eyed fans caught something strange. Snape lifts his wand and mutters something that looks and sounds eerily close to Sectum Sempra, a curse he was never supposed to know. Because in Half-Blood Prince, Harry finds it written in Snape's old potions book with the chilling note, "For enemies." That spell didn't exist publicly when Snape was 15. It came from his own twisted genius years later. So how could young Snape use it against James? Either the filmmakers slipped, forgetting their own timeline, or the story runs deeper. Maybe Snape had already begun inventing curses in secret. Maybe Sectum Sempra was born earlier than we thought, developed in dark corners of the library while others were playing Quidditch. Or maybe, just maybe, Snape had time and memory on his side. After all, in a world where time-turners exist and secrets are guarded with occlumency, who's to say Snape didn't experiment far beyond what anyone ever imagined? Number 9. Why did no one recognize Sirius in his dog form? The black dog haunted the edges of Harry's vision, on Privet Drive, in the shadows of Hogsmeade, even inside Hogwarts. Students saw it, teachers heard rumors, but no one questioned why a large, grim-looking canine was stalking the boy who lived. Not even Professor McGonagall, who could spot a transforming animagus in seconds. Not even Dumbledore, who once said he trusted no one completely. Sirius Black, a wanted fugitive, was hiding in plain sight. Was his animagus form that convincing? Or had the wizarding world grown too confident in their own safety? "He's a dog, a big black dog," Ron said after the grim sighting. Hermione dismissed it. So did everyone else. Perhaps the real answer lies in the same place as so many Hogwarts mysteries. People only see what they expect to see. No one expected a madman to be smart. No one believed a prisoner of Azkaban could be clever enough to become invisible without magic. But Sirius was, and he was watching. Number 10. Why did the Potters choose Pettigrew as secret keeper? Sirius Black was the obvious choice. He was James's best friend, his brother in all but blood. Everyone assumed Sirius was the secret keeper for the Potters. Even Voldemort thought so. That was the plan, until Sirius suggested a switch. "I convinced them to use Pettigrew instead," Sirius tells Harry, in The Prisoner of Azkaban. "I thought it was the perfect plan. Voldemort would never think they'd use such a weak, talentless thing. But it wasn't just a clever trick, it was a fatal gamble." James and Lily agreed. That's what stings. They trusted Peter Pettigrew, the quiet boy who followed them like a shadow. Maybe they pitied him. Maybe they wanted to protect him by giving him importance. Maybe they truly believed that hiding the secret with the least likely person would keep their son safe. But the risk was staggering. Peter had never shown the strength Sirius had. He had never defended his friends in battle, and yet they put the life of their child, of Harry, in his trembling hands. Sirius blamed himself for years. "I as good as killed them," he said, choking on the words. But the question remains, why did James and Lily listen to him? Why didn't Dumbledore step in? Why wasn't Remus Lupin even considered? The answer is lost in those last, desperate days of war. Maybe they were too scared. Maybe they were too hopeful. Or maybe they simply couldn't imagine that one of their own had already chosen the dark. Number 11. Why did Lupin appear so late in Harry's life? Remus Lupin disappeared after the First Wizarding War. He didn't attend James and Lily's funeral. He didn't visit baby Harry. For 12 years he drifted, poor, isolated, unwanted. He told Harry in The Prisoner of Azkaban, "People like me are not shown much kindness." He meant werewolves, yes, but maybe he also meant cowards, because the truth is he stayed away. And Harry, growing up in a cupboard under the stairs, never knew that one of his father's best friends was still alive. Lupin had reasons. He was a registered werewolf in a world that feared and hated his kind. Jobs were scarce, homes even scarcer. He lived on the fringes, ashamed of what he was. Dumbledore might have advised him to stay away, to protect Harry from questions, to protect Remus from public scorn, but no one told Lupin he couldn't write a letter. No one stopped him from watching over Harry from a distance. When he finally appears, it's not as a godfather or family friend. It's as a teacher hiding a secret. And yet, the first time he speaks to Harry on the Hogwarts Express, there's a quiet pain in his voice, a hesitation. He looks at the boy and sees James's face. He sees everything he lost. "You look extraordinarily like your father," he whispers. In that moment, we realize it wasn't just fear or shame. It was grief. Remus Lupin had locked himself away in more ways than one. And by the time he opened that door, too many years had passed. Number 12, how did no teacher uncover the Marauders' secrets? The Marauders lived in the shadows of Hogwarts. 4 boys, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, managed to become unregistered animagi, create the Marauders' map, and explore every secret of the castle, all under the noses of the most powerful wizards in Britain. Minerva McGonagall was a registered animagus herself. Yet she never suspected that 3 of her students had accomplished one of the most difficult, magical feats in existence, and done it in secret. It's not as though they were subtle. James and Sirius were the loudest troublemakers in the school. Detentions, pranks, hexes in the corridors. McGonagall once sighed, "Why is it always you 3? They weren't hiding. They flaunted their mischief. So how did no one ever notice that a stag, a dog, and a rat were slipping off into the Forbidden Forest each full moon to accompany a werewolf? Did no teacher ever question how Lupin managed his illness with such precision, or why a whomping willow was planted with no official explanation? Even Dumbledore, with his far-reaching gaze, missed the truth. Or did he? When Lupin returns as a professor, he tells Harry, "Dumbledore's more trusting than most. He let me come to school." Perhaps the headmaster knew more than he let on. Maybe he allowed the Marauders their secrets. thinking it was safer to let them explore than to force them into isolation. But that choice had consequences. A map that could track every soul in the castle, a rat that went unnoticed for years. The question isn't just how they hid it, it's why no one tried to stop them. The Marauders weren't just clever, they were bold, reckless, and, in a strange way, brilliant. But their story shows that Hogwarts, for all its enchantments, is still a place where children outwit adults, and where silence can be more dangerous than mischief. Number 13. Why was Peter Pettigrew sorted into Gryffindor? Peter Pettigrew walked into Hogwarts a nervous, forgettable boy. No one clapped when his name was called. He shuffled to the stool, pale and sweating, and yet when the sorting hat was lowered onto his head, it shouted Gryffindor without hesitation. This decision would confuse readers for decades. How did a coward, a traitor, a man who faked his own death and betrayed his best friends, end up in the House of the Brave? Unlike James Potter, who defended his friends, or Sirius Black, who ran away from his pure blood family to follow his values, Peter never stood for anything. Even Remus Lupin, burdened with lycanthropy, showed more courage each day than Peter ever did in his lifetime. Pettigrew's defining moment came not from valor, but fear. He handed over Lily and James to Voldemort and murdered 12 muggles to escape. His reward? A silver hand from the Dark Lord and a life spent scurrying like the rat he became. Some fans argued the sorting hat saw something, some flicker of courage buried deep within him. Maybe the courage it takes to betray the people who trust you. Or maybe, as Harry once did, Peter begged the hat. Harry pleaded not to be put in Slytherin, and the hat listened. What if Peter whispered, "Not Slytherin, not Slytherin," over and over again, and the hat, sensing his panic, relented? Maybe that one moment of resolve was enough. But the hat has made mistakes before. Dumbledore once said, "It is our choices that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." Peter chose fear, again and again. Perhaps he was a Gryffindor in name only, a mirror of the house's shadow side. The reminder that bravery without integrity becomes recklessness, and loyalty without courage becomes betrayal. Number 14. Why did everyone tolerate James bullying Snape? There is a shadow over the golden memory of James Potter, and it lingers not in some dark corridor of the Department of Mysteries, but in a sunlit courtyard at Hogwarts. A memory bottled by Severus Snape, forced from his mind during an occlumency lesson with Harry. It shows a 15-year-old boy dangling upside down, his robes over his head, while laughter rings out around him. The spell is non-lethal, but the cruelty is unmistakable. James Potter, admired Quidditch captain and darling of Gryffindor House, grins as he torments a fellow student, not in private, not in secret, but in full view of his peers. Harry, who had grown up idolizing a father he never knew, watches this scene in Order of the Phoenix with a sickening sense of disillusionment. "I wouldn't go out with you if it was a choice between you and the giant squid," Lily Evans spits, her face twisted in disgust at James's behavior. This was not the man from the stories. This was a boy who wielded power with arrogance, who humiliated others for sport. And it wasn't an isolated incident. The memory offered a glimpse into a pattern, not a fluke. The Marauders, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, are often framed as the light-hearted rebels, mischief-makers whose crimes were mostly harmless pranks. But Severus Snape's memories dismantle that narrative. Sirius, grinning, eggs James on. Peter laughs eagerly, and Remus Lupin, gentle, scholarly, moral Remus, looks away. This silent complicity is more damning than the act itself, because Remus knew better, and yet he did nothing. In The Prince's Tale from Deathly Hallows, Snape's recollection of that moment doesn't fade with time. It's embedded in him like a scar. Hogwarts, for Snape, was never safe. He walked its stone corridors knowing that at any moment he could be hexed, ridiculed, or worse. It's no wonder that bitterness fermented in his soul, or that he turned toward dark corners in search of power. If one's own teachers won't protect you, to whom does one appeal? But therein lies a greater puzzle, the teachers. Where was Professor McGonagall, the stern and just deputy headmistress who seemed never to miss an infraction? Where was Flitwick, or even Pomona Sprout, whose loyalty to fairness was legendary? More troubling still, where was Albus Dumbledore? He knew much, saw more, and acted rarely. His silence roars across decades. It is impossible to believe that McGonagall never noticed the animosity between her Gryffindors and Slytherin students, especially Snape, whose injuries could hardly go unnoticed. But perhaps the house rivalry, the institutionalized prejudice between Gryffindor and Slytherin, blurred the lines of fairness. Perhaps even Minerva McGonagall, so often held up as a paragon of virtue, was unconsciously swayed by her lion-hearted loyalty. Dumbledore's silence, however, is more troubling. He knew who Snape was. He knew his background, his loneliness, and his inclination toward darkness. He also knew what James and Sirius were doing. Dumbledore always knew. He once told Harry in Half-Blood Prince, "I make mistakes like the next man. In fact, being rather cleverer than most men, my mistakes tend to be correspondingly huger." One wonders if his failure to protect Snape was one of those hugely tragic miscalculations. James and Sirius were privileged. They were popular, wealthy, and talented, boys who could break the rules and still win the game. The system worked for them, and no authority figure held them accountable. They were the sort of young men whom others forgave easily, as though their charm was proof of their innocence. But charm is not virtue, and cruelty dressed in confidence is still cruelty. The favoritism was not subtle. James was made head boy despite a record of rule-breaking. Sirius received endless second chances, even when Sirius, in a moment of unthinkable recklessness, tricked Snape into nearly being killed by a transformed werewolf. He was not expelled. Dumbledore scolded him, yes, but let him stay. "Sirius is not a bad person, Severus," Dumbledore told Snape. "You are blinded by your hatred." But if Snape was blinded by hatred, Dumbledore was blinded by affection. This raises a deeper question. Did Dumbledore believe that Snape, with his Slytherin tendencies and dark friendships, was simply less deserving of protection? Did he see Snape's suffering as the natural consequence of his associations? Dumbledore, for all his wisdom, was prone to viewing people as chess pieces. Perhaps he saw Snape's suffering as part of some grand moral test, a crucible through which he might emerge stronger. But children are not meant to be forged in fire. They are meant to be protected. The Marauders map itself, so often admired by fans as a clever magical artifact, is perhaps the most damning relic of their era. Not only did it expose secrets, but it also served as a tool of surveillance, enabling James and Sirius to follow Snape, torment him, ambush him. Its very existence is a testament to their obsession with domination, cloaked in the guise of humour. Remus Lupin, in Prisoner of Azkaban, tells Harry, "They, James and Sirius, were the cleverest students in the school, but I sometimes felt guilty for not stopping them. I should have made them stop." But he didn't. And guilt is cold comfort to the boy who was left dangling upside down. Lily Evans, the only one who dared to confront James, lost her patience with him that day. And though she would later forgive him, her anger in that moment is significant. "You're as bad as he is," she told James, referencing Snape's own cruelty. It was a brutal verdict, but one born of honesty. James was not the shining hero Harry had imagined. He was a teenager, drunk on power. Number 15. Why didn't the Marauders use the map to fight Death Eaters? Of all the magical creations to emerge from the rebellious brilliance of James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, the infamous Marauders, none is as enduring or as mysteriously limited as the Marauders map. It revealed not only the layout of Hogwarts, but the real-time movements of every individual inside its walls. The question then has haunted thoughtful readers for years. Why didn't the Marauders, or later their allies, ever attempt to expand the map's power? In the war against Voldemort and the Death Eaters, such a tool could have changed everything. Its absence from the battlefield feels not like an oversight, but a silence too deliberate to ignore. The map, activated with the phrase, "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good," and erased by mischief managed, was more than a prank. It was a surveillance tool, a magical intelligence asset, a lifeline in corridors that often held danger. During the 1993-94 school year, Harry Potter used it to sneak into Hogsmeade undetected and to track both friends and enemies. He saw people whose names he recognized walking across the parchment. Even the supposedly dead Peter Pettigrew was revealed, hidden under the alias of Scabbers the Rat. And yet, the Marauders themselves never saw the map as anything more than a school-based joke. That decision, or lack of vision, now seems startling in its consequences. In 1977, the Marauders had access to the most advanced magical tracking system known to Hogwarts students. They had created a map so sensitive that it detected animagi even when transformed. It revealed hidden passages, concealed rooms, and the forbidden forest's edge. It marked the presence of teachers, ghosts, even Peeves. But the question lingers. When the First Wizarding War erupted and Voldemort's grip tightened across Britain, why didn't James, Sirius, Remus, or even Dumbledore explore the map's potential beyond the school grounds? It wasn't that the threat wasn't real. By the late 1970s, Voldemort was already orchestrating murders, torture, and disappearances. The Order of the Phoenix was formed in response, led by Dumbledore and filled with the very witches and wizards who knew the Marauders personally. Yet, in the memory of all those who fought in that war, there's no mention of a tracking map ever being used to trace Death Eaters, intercept attacks, or follow suspected spies. The Marauders map remained in a drawer, forgotten, while the world burned. It's hard to imagine that someone as cunning and defiant as Sirius Black wouldn't consider the map's wartime potential. He was impulsive, yes, but deeply strategic. He survived Azkaban not by force, but by transformation. He slipped through magical barriers undetected, outwitting even Dementors. And yet, when it came to the map, he never once suggested that Harry use it to gain insight into the Death Eaters' activities outside of school. Nor did he attempt to recreate or expand it for the Order's use. His mind, brilliant in its own wild way, seemed content to leave the map as a relic of youth. Remus Lupin, more cautious and deeply intellectual, might have been the one to quietly investigate its magical architecture. He had years after the war to study magical artifacts, to research forbidden texts, to reforge the past into something useful. As a professor, he used the map to verify Harry's claims, to protect students from harm. He acknowledged its complexity, even marveling at it. "It is a very unusual map," he said, in Prisoner of Azkaban. And yet, when he rejoined the Order, there is no indication he ever brought it up. Why? Perhaps the answer lies within the map itself. From the moment it was created, its loyalty was tied to Hogwarts. The magic it used wasn't just one of cartography or movement. It was bound to the castle's enchantments, to the protections woven into its walls by the founders. Hogwarts itself seems to be part of the map's intelligence. It knows its own corridors, it recognizes its own wards. To extend the map would mean understanding not just its spells, but the ancient magic of Hogwarts, something even Dumbledore approached with reverence. There's also the question of secrecy. The Marauders, for all their boldness, were still schoolboys when they created the map. They had no idea their joke would become a wartime artifact. Once the war began, James and Lily were consumed with protection, living under Fidelius' charm, trusting their fates to a traitor. They had no time to revisit teenage magic. James died at 21. Sirius was imprisoned the same night. Remus was isolated, hunted by stigma and grief. Only Peter, the betrayer, survived freely, and he had no interest in repurposing the map that could expose his secrets. The map's design may also have presented a limitation none of the Marauders foresaw. It required a deep, personal knowledge of the place it was mapping. The Marauders knew Hogwarts intimately. They had memorized its halls, its secret rooms, its portrait passages. They walked it every night as animals, learning the feel of stone and shadow. That bond between map and maker was key. To extend the map to other locations, Diagon Alley, the Ministry, or Death Eater strongholds, would demand a similar level of familiarity and magical intimacy. Such knowledge couldn't be acquired without risk. Moreover, the magic behind the map was likely a convergence of several highly complex spells, perhaps a combination of the homunculus charm, enchantments of permanence, and layered concealment spells. The homunculus charm alone, which tracks individuals by name and position, is considered borderline dark magic if extended without consent. It bypasses privacy spells, magical disguises, and even transformations. Any attempt to recreate such an object outside of Hogwarts would likely raise questions within the Ministry of Magic, questions that might get even members of the Order accused of illegal surveillance. Number 16. Why didn't Sirius tell Harry the truth earlier? When Sirius Black escaped from Azkaban, the wizarding world trembled. The Daily Prophet screamed headlines about the fugitive, warnings went out across Britain, and even the Muggle Prime Minister was informed. The Ministry's panic made sense. Sirius had been convicted for betraying James and Lily Potter and murdering Peter Pettigrew and 12 Muggles. The narrative was sealed. A traitor and killer was on the loose. But Sirius knew the truth. He knew that Peter was the real traitor, and that Harry had grown up in ignorance, raised by people who despised his parents. And yet, Sirius chose silence. In Prisoner of Azkaban, everything comes to a head in the Shrieking Shack. There, under the rotting floorboards and shattered windows, the truth finally bursts out. "I would have died rather than betray my friends," Sirius tells Harry, his voice shaking with more than just fury. But by that point, Harry had spent nearly a full school year believing Sirius was coming to kill him. He'd heard it from Arthur Weasley, he'd seen it in the Prophet, and he'd connected the name Sirius Black only with blood and betrayal. All because Sirius waited. It's easy to argue that Sirius had no way to reach Harry. He was on the run, a wanted man, hunted by Dementors. But Sirius was not an ordinary fugitive. This was the same man who slipped past Azkaban's horrors using only his animagus form and sheer will. He crossed half of Britain without a wand, eluded magical detection, and nearly reached the Gryffindor common room. A man with that kind of cunning surely had other options than hiding in shadows and waiting for fate to intervene. Why didn't he contact Dumbledore? After all, Dumbledore had once been his headmaster, and he trusted the man enough to fight beside him in the Order of the Phoenix. More importantly, Dumbledore was the one wizard who could have investigated Sirius's story. Yet Sirius chose not to reach out. He never sent a message to Hogwarts, never tried to arrange a secret meeting. "I don't trust the system," Sirius might have reasoned, but Dumbledore had always stood above the system. He could have spoken to Harry, he could have written the boy a single letter, but he didn't. What about Remus Lupin? Here was another marauder, still alive, still close to Dumbledore, and within the walls of Hogwarts that very year. Remus knew Sirius better than anyone. Sirius could have found a way to contact him. A hidden note, a whispered Patronus, anything. But Sirius waited until they all met in the Shrieking Shack. Was it pride? Was it fear? Or was it simply recklessness? When he finally does speak to Harry, Sirius seems overwhelmed by emotion. "You look so much like your father," he says. It's a line heavy with grief, nostalgia, and guilt. Sirius had spent 12 years in a cell, replaying the events of that fateful night over and over again. Maybe, in his mind, he was still back in Godric's Hollow, still trying to undo the horror. But Harry wasn't just James's son. He was a boy growing up without the truth. That silence cost them both precious time. There is a moment in the book that exposes the weight of Sirius's choices. As Harry learns more about his godfather, he asks, "Why didn't anyone tell me?" And it's a valid question. Dumbledore knew who Sirius was. So did McGonagall. Even Hagrid had known him on the night of James and Lily's death. Yet no one ever told Harry that he had a godfather, much less that he might still be alive. And Sirius, once free, never tried to bridge that terrible gap. Even after Azkaban, Sirius was not without allies. Arabella Figg, a squib living near Harry, was part of the Order. Mundungus Fletcher had his connections. Sirius could have found someone trustworthy to deliver a message, a simple note, "Harry, I am not what they say. I will find you. Be safe." But the note never came. Instead, Sirius sent a firebolt, a gesture of affection but not explanation. The broom brought joy, yes, but also confusion. Who sends a gift like that in secret? Some might argue that the risk was too great, that if the owl was intercepted or if Harry spoke too soon, Sirius would be captured. But Sirius was already taking reckless risks. He broke into Hogwarts, watched Harry play Quidditch, and even slashed the fat lady's portrait. These were not the actions of a cautious man. They were the actions of someone acting on instinct without strategy. Sirius wanted revenge, not clarity. The irony is that the truth would have set him free. Not legally, Cornelius Fudge was too stubborn for that, but emotionally. Had Harry known earlier, had Sirius explained himself with words rather than silence, their bond might have formed under gentler stars. Instead, it was born in blood and accusations, in a shack where wands were drawn and lives were at stake. "Peter was the secret keeper," Sirius shouts in desperation, "not me!" But how different that moment could have been if he had prepared the ground with truth. Consider Buckbeak. Sirius orchestrates a daring escape with the Hippogriff, aided by Hermione's time-turner. This was a man capable of intricate planning under extreme pressure. Yet he couldn't plan a single honest conversation with the boy he considered family. Even his final note to Harry left in The Prisoner of Azkaban is cryptic. "I hope this finds you before the owl delivers your Hogwarts letter." There is warmth in the words, but no clarity. No answers. The tragedy of Sirius is that he never stopped being the boy in the Gryffindor common room. Reckless, brave, impulsive. He was a marauder at heart, defiant, emotional, loyal to a fault. But loyalty without communication is hollow. Harry deserved to know, not just about Peter, but about his parents, about Sirius's friendship with James, about what truly happened that Halloween night. These were stories that could have healed Harry, could have shielded him from the worst kind of isolation. Number 17, why didn't the Marauders leave instructions for the map? During the height of the First Wizarding War, the Order of the Phoenix stood as the last barrier between Voldemort's growing forces and the collapse of Wizarding Britain. It was a desperate time when even Dumbledore had to call upon werewolves, ex-Azkaban inmates and estranged ministry officials. And yet, for reasons never openly discussed, the most brilliant, daring and tightly bonded group of Hogwarts graduates, the Marauders, never emerged as a true backbone of the resistance. They were talented, inventive, unafraid to break rules, and remarkably good at keeping secrets. But the question lingers like a shadow over their legacy. Why did Dumbledore, the master strategist, never fully utilize the Marauders? James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew. Their names were once whispered in the corridors of Hogwarts with both awe and exasperation. They could create a map that defied the enchantments of the greatest school in Europe, learn to become illegal animagi, and evade authority with ease. When they graduated, they entered a world already on the edge of darkness. One would expect that Dumbledore, who always claimed to trust in youthful hope and cleverness, would have shaped them into his most elite operatives, but that did not happen. James Potter was unquestionably brave. He joined the Order and stood firm in the line of fire. There are records of him participating in multiple skirmishes against Death Eaters, sometimes even alongside Sirius. Yet his wartime career feels curiously brief. He and Lily went into hiding when Harry was only a year old, leaving a conspicuous gap in the narrative. Yes, they became targets early, but James's name does not ring through Order tales the way Frank Longbottom's does. Frank led raids, interrogated captured Death Eaters, and became a legendary aura. James, despite equal, some would say greater, magical aptitude, seems to vanish into the domestic shadows. Sirius Black, too, was never used as one might expect. A pure-blood rebel who turned against his family and fought for the light. His story was one of the most symbolically powerful in the whole war. His hatred of Voldemort, his strategic mind, and his ferocity made him a natural for high-risk missions. And yet, when the war ended, he was remembered not as a hero, but as a prisoner. The man who had once escaped from Hogwarts to spend full moons at the side of a werewolf, out of loyalty, was left without alibi, without trial. Dumbledore, who defended Draco Malfoy's innocence during his attempted murder plot, never once questioned Sirius's guilt. As for Remus Lupin, one might have expected him to become a cornerstone of the Order's intelligence network. He was quiet, observant, and socially adept in a way the others were not. He could have been invaluable in infiltration missions or diplomatic outreach. He was also a werewolf, uniquely suited to navigate Greyback's network and gather information from the creatures Voldemort sought to manipulate. Instead, Remus was barely included. As he later confessed, "I was never one of Dumbledore's favorites." While he eventually returned to the fight during the Second War, his contributions during the First remained quiet, perhaps deliberately obscured. Peter Pettigrew's role is the most controversial of all. We know now he was the traitor, the secret keeper who betrayed the Potters. But before his betrayal, he was a marauder too. The others trusted him with their lives. The ease with which he was written off after James and Lily's death, deemed too weak to be a Death Eater, dismissed as a coward, should have raised questions. Dumbledore, known for seeing the hidden depths in people, never questioned Peter's disappearance, never considered he might be hiding in plain sight. He showed more suspicion toward Snape, who risked his life to switch sides, than toward Peter, who was never even investigated. There is a pattern here, one that hints at deliberate omission. Dumbledore was not a sentimental man. He knew the stakes, and he chose his warriors carefully. He trusted Aberforth and Mundungus Fletcher before he trusted the full talents of the Marauders. This raises a deeply uncomfortable question. Did he ever truly see them as serious fighters, or merely as schoolboys with too much mischief in their blood? The Marauders had accomplished magical feats that most adult wizards couldn't dream of. Becoming animagi without guidance is something that required not only intelligence, but commitment. Lupin said they did it for him, to keep him company during his transformations. It took them 3 years to master it. That alone should have proven their worth. Yet Dumbledore never asked how they did it, never recruited them to train others, never drew upon the knowledge they possessed. It's possible that their own behavior in school contributed to this. They were rule breakers, bullies even. Snape's memories show James and Sirius hexing students for amusement. Dumbledore may have observed this cruelty and filed them away as undisciplined. He did nothing to punish them. He was famously hands-off. But perhaps he remembered their arrogance more than their loyalty. When it came time to form a resistance, he may have hesitated, unwilling to place too much trust in the boys who once nearly got a fellow student killed. But perhaps the more plausible reason lies in the subtle fractures within their friendship. Though the Marauders projected unity, there were cracks beneath the surface. Remus Lupin often felt like the outsider, the condition always making him second-guess his place. Sirius, for all his charisma, was impulsive and mistrustful. He once accused Remus of betrayal without evidence, a mistake that cost them dearly. James was the glue, but his early departure to family life left the group without its centre. And Peter, always the overlooked one, nursed his insecurities in silence. These tensions may have prevented Dumbledore from trusting them as a unit. The strength of the Marauders was always their unity. Individually, they were capable, but together they were unstoppable. But if Dumbledore sensed that the trust was fraying, that Sirius didn't fully trust Remus, that Remus was too cautious, that Peter was too frightened, he may have decided that relying on them was too risky. In Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore tells Harry, "I cared more for your happiness than your knowing the truth." It is one of the few times he admits to deliberate omission. Might the same logic have applied to the Marauders? Did he believe that involving them deeply in the Order would put them in greater danger than they were prepared for? Did he hold them back, not because they were unworthy, but because he didn't want to lose them? There is irony here. In sparing them, he may have sealed their fate. Had the Marauders been given real responsibility, leadership, ownership of missions, purpose, perhaps Peter would not have turned. Perhaps Sirius would not have made a reckless choice to use Peter as secret keeper. Perhaps Remus would not have been left wandering in the shadows, never fully sure of his place. There is a scene in Deathly Hallows that feels particularly telling. As Harry walks to his death, the spirits of James, Sirius, and Remus walk beside him. He asks Remus whether dying was painful. Remus answers, "Not at all," quicker than falling asleep. These words are peaceful, but they hide the tragedy. Remus died fighting in a war that once tried to exclude him. He gave everything despite being asked for so little. It is also worth noting that even in the Second War, Dumbledore's strategies often sidelined individuals who might have been more effective with clear directives. He worked in secrets and half-truths. The Marauders, so accustomed to camaraderie and shared plans, may have found this structure disorienting. In such an environment, Peter, vulnerable and unsure, may have found Voldemort's clarity more comforting than Dumbledore's ambiguity. The final image of the Marauders is one of tragedy. 4 boys who once roamed Hogwarts as kings full of dreams and mischief ended up broken by the war. James died at 21. Sirius spent 12 years in prison. Remus lived in shame and died in battle. Peter lived as a rat, enslaved by fear and regret. It is hard not to wonder whether things could have been different had Dumbledore chosen to trust them, not as reckless boys, but as men. The Marauders' map, their greatest creation, becomes a symbol of their legacy. It is clever, rebellious, and enduring. But it is also a relic of youth, of a time when they believed they were invincible. Perhaps Dumbledore, with his long view of history, saw their brilliance as too unstable, too fragile for war. Perhaps he believed the cost of letting them lead would be too high. Yet history shows us that underestimation is often more dangerous than overconfidence. The tragedy of the Marauders lies not in their choices alone, but in how the world around them failed to see their full potential. Dumbledore, who saw potential in Snape, in Draco, even in Tom Riddle once, may have looked at the Marauders and seen only pranksters, not prophets. And perhaps that misjudgment was the first betrayal, the one that set the rest in motion. Number 18, why didn't anyone realize Scabbers was human? There was a rat at the heart of the story, and no one saw it. For nearly 12 years, Peter Pettigrew slept in the hut in a teenage boy's bed, crept across the floors of the burrow, and attended Hogwarts in the pocket of a school uniform, and nobody questioned a thing. He lived under the name Scabbers, a common rat of unremarkable breed and murky origin, introduced into the Weasley household with casual warmth. But Scabbers was not a pet. He was a fugitive, a traitor, and a man. And this fact, obvious in retrospect, escaped the notice of the most powerful magical minds of the era. The average lifespan of a domestic rat is no more than 3 years. Percy Weasley owned Scabbers before Ron, which means the rat had already surpassed expectations when passed down like a hand-me-down wand. Ron himself noted in The Prisoner of Azkaban that Scabbers has been looking a bit off colour for ages. Yet no one said aloud what should have been obvious. The rat should have been dead. When Hermione buys Crookshanks and the cat launches into an instant vendetta against Scabbers, Ron defends his pet with loyalty, but even this fierce devotion couldn't explain the contradiction. The rat simply lived too long. Fred and George Weasley, pranksters, inventors, and lifelong troublemakers, possessed the Marauders map, an artifact created by none other than Scabbers' former self and his 3 co-conspirators. The map shows the names of all individuals within Hogwarts, not magical creatures, not owls, not cats, not rats. People. How then did Fred or George never glance upon the name Peter Pettigrew wandering through the Gryffindor dormitory right beside Ron? It wasn't a secret passage. It wasn't a hidden room. Peter was there in plain sight. The map never lied. So did they never look? Remus Lupin, perhaps, should have known better than anyone. A marauder himself, a friend of James and Sirius. He was at Hogwarts during Ron's 3rd year, teaching defense against the dark arts, the very year Sirius Black broke out of Azkaban. Remus used the map. He held it in his hands. He saw Peter's name. And he dismissed it, convinced, as were most, that Peter had died a martyr, blown to bits by Sirius Black. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Lupin admits that he saw Peter on the map. "I thought the map was malfunctioning," he confessed. It's one of the most haunting failures in the narrative, a man trained to read signs refusing to believe what he sees. Minerva McGonagall, the Transfiguration Master, might be the most puzzling omission of all. She had an animagus registration. She taught the subject for decades she could turn into a cat at will and knew the intricacies of magical transformation better than perhaps any living witch. During Ron's 1st year, Scabbers was there, during classes, during meals, during crises. If there had been a flicker of the human about him, an emotion too knowing in the eyes, a posture too unrodent-like, an unnatural reaction to a spell or a scent, surely she would have sensed it. Yet the rat passed under her nose for years. Sirius Black, when he escaped Azkaban, had one goal: find and kill Peter Pettigrew. He believed Peter was in Hogwarts, hiding as a rat. Sirius was deranged, but not delusional. He saw the signs. He knew. He even tried to explain to Harry that Peter had betrayed his parents and faked his death. But the problem was not in Sirius seeing Peter. The problem was that no one else believed he could possibly be alive, because they never suspected the rat. Peter was a coward. That was his defining trait, more than treachery, more than magic. He hid in the safest place imaginable, a child's pet, a family full of poor but loyal Gryffindors. No one would look there. No one would ever think that Lord Voldemort's most faithful servant was gnawing crusts under the table at the Burrow. In the Goblet of Fire, Dumbledore himself acknowledges Peter's importance. The servant has rejoined his master. And yet for 12 years the rat went unnoticed in the same castle where Dumbledore ruled, where legilimency and magical surveillance were daily tools. What blind spot allowed him to survive? Peter wasn't just hiding, he was surviving spells. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Hermione remarks, I think Crookshanks is really very intelligent. Crookshanks wasn't just intuitive. He was part Kneazle, a magical creature able to sense deception. From the moment he sees Scabbers, he wants to kill him. Hermione is appalled. Ron is defensive, but the cat is right. The rat was not a rat. Yet this instinct was dismissed as feline quirkiness. Crookshanks was nearly villainized for trying to unmask a murderer. Scabbers feared magic. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, when Ron attempts to cast a spell near him, the rat reacts with unnatural terror. He bolts. He doesn't behave like a frightened animal. He acts like a man about to be found out. Even Gilderoy Lockhart, clueless in most things, could have noticed how strangely Scabbers behaved during lessons. But Peter avoided attention. He faked illness, slept too much, feigned fatigue. It's almost poetic how the laziest and most ignored member of the Weasley family turned out to be the most dangerous. The Marauders' talent was deception. They fooled teachers, snuck into forbidden places, invented a map that saw through every glamour and disguise. And yet, when it came to Peter, their own skill turned against them. The very talent that once made Peter powerful helped him vanish. He knew how the map worked. He knew what people ignored. He knew, above all, how to be forgettable. And forgettable is the greatest weapon a fugitive can have. During the events at the Shrieking Shack, when Scabbers is revealed to be Peter, the shock is profound. "There's no way he could be Pettigrew, Harry!" Ron screams. The disbelief is sincere. Peter played his part to perfection. For years, he never broke character, never slipped, never muttered in his sleep, never laughed at an inappropriate time. Even under threat of discovery, he maintained the mask. That level of control is not cowardice, it is discipline. The kind born of desperate survival. Arthur and Molly Weasley never questioned it. They had 7 children, a ramshackle home, and little time to ponder the oddities of their youngest son's pet. Scabbers was simply part of the background, something small and quiet, unlike their twins or Ginny's singing. Molly worried about school books and socks. She didn't analyze the existential mystery of a rat's improbable lifespan. But still, even in the chaos of a magical household, would a mother not notice if the pet watched her too closely? There's a moment in the Chamber of Secrets that should chill the reader in retrospect. Ron brings Scabbers to school again, though the rat is getting thinner. Gilderoy Lockhart attempts to cure his bald patch. A bald patch, a wizard with hands trained to hold wands, not noticing that the skin beneath the fur belonged to a human animagus. That moment, played for laughs, is a tragic, missed opportunity. Lockhart, ironically, could have been the one to unmask Peter, had he possessed any actual magical talent. The animagus transformation is not a casual parlor trick. It requires years of training, precise knowledge of magical anatomy, and official ministry registration. Peter was unregistered, illegal. The spell work was dangerous, and yet he succeeded. Not once, but for over a decade. The level of magical endurance to remain transformed that long without error or involuntary reversion is staggering. Was Peter more powerful than anyone realized, or simply more afraid? Fear explains much. Peter feared death. He feared Voldemort, feared Azkaban, feared exposure. That fear was so potent, it enabled him to suppress his human urges, to remain in rat form during holidays, summers, school years, never reverting, never speaking. He even endured the Cruciatus curse, as mentioned by Sirius, though the books never depict the moment directly. Can a rat survive an unforgivable curse? Or only a man in the shape of a rat, shielding his mind? It is easy, perhaps too easy, to blame the blindness of others. Hogwarts is a place of wonders and distractions, giants, trolls, basilisks. Who would suspect a rat? But the question lingers. Why did no one ever cast Revelio? Why didn't a single professor use hominum revelio near Scabbers in a castle, crawling with suspicious events? Why didn't Ron himself, surrounded by spellbooks and adventures, ever think to wonder what his pet might be? Peter's performance was so convincing it reshaped reality. He became the rat. He believed it. He acted not like a man pretending, but like an animal surviving. The deeper tragedy is that Peter, weak as he was, might have longed to remain a rat forever. Safe, small, unnoticed. But his mark, the dark mark, still branded him, visible on the human flesh beneath the fur. A mark that no spell could erase. A clue that might have undone him, Had anyone thought to look? The end. Peter's greatest weapon was not magic. It was being underestimated, overlooked, forgotten. Even Sirius and Remus, when finally face to face with him, are stunned by how easily he disappeared from their memories, their assumptions, their logic. Dumbledore, master of insight, missed him. Snape, expert in legilimency, overlooked him. The Ministry wrote him off as dead. No spell was needed. The world simply did not ask the right question: what if the rat was never a rat at all? The question lingers still, not because the answer is hard to find, but because it reveals an uncomfortable truth, that the wizarding world, for all its wisdom and wonder, is still a place where the most obvious lies can go undetected. Because when evil hides in plain sight, it doesn't need to wear a mask, it only needs to make itself look small. Number 19. Why didn't Sirius explain himself to Ron and Hermione right away? Sirius Black had 12 years in the cell to imagine the moment he would face Peter Pettigrew again. 12 years of cold stone, howling wind, and Dementors sucking the warmth from every thought. Yet when that moment finally came, in the dark, dusty room of the Shrieking Shack, he did not reveal a carefully constructed truth. He pounced, mad-eyed and snarling, and everything that followed spiraled into chaos. What could have been a moment of revelation and justice turned into a nightmare of shattered bones and time-traveling confusion. But why did Sirius choose fury over explanation? When Ron Weasley was dragged into the shack by the supposedly harmless Scabbers, no one expected the encounter to end with secrets exploding like spells. The moment Hermione Granger and Harry Potter burst in, Sirius had every chance to speak. But instead of words, he offered silence. Thick, menacing silence laced with vengeance. "Come off it," he hissed at Harry, his eyes glowing with years of bottled hatred. The wand wasn't even in his hand. It was rage that led. Logic stayed behind, still locked in Azkaban. It is tempting to write off his erratic behavior as a product of imprisonment. After all, 12 years without human conversation could unravel even the most resilient mind. But Sirius was not broken when he escaped. He was focused. He followed the news. He knew where to find Harry. He tracked Peter to Hogwarts. He even sent Harry a firebolt, a gesture of thoughtfulness. This was not a man incapable of strategy. So why, when it mattered most, did he refuse to explain? The mystery deepens when one recalls how easy it would have been to speak. One sentence, just one, could have changed everything. Peter Pettigrew faked his death and has been hiding as Ron's rat. That line alone would have forced the trio to stop. It might not have earned immediate trust, but it would have opened a door. Instead, Sirius barked, snarled, threatened, and pinned Ron to the floor. The children responded with fear, and understandably so. Hermione was ready to curse him on the spot. What followed was an exhausting dance of half-truths and withheld names. Only when Remus Lupin appeared did the pieces begin to align. Even then, it took more than 10 minutes of back and forth before anyone mentioned Pettigrew's name aloud. All the while, Sirius watched with a crooked grin as though he were enjoying the performance. Was this a theatrical instinct, or was something deeper, something darker, guiding his actions? Consider this. Sirius had lived for 12 years in a world where his voice meant nothing. He had shouted the truth before. At his arrest he laughed, not out of guilt, but despair. No one had listened then. The wizarding world had already chosen a narrative. Sirius betrayed the Potters. He was a murderer. That was that. Perhaps in that moment in the Shrieking Shack, Sirius no longer believed words could free him. Perhaps only actions, wild, unrestrained, undeniable actions, could reveal the truth. Still, even if we grant him that psychological burden, why didn't he adjust once he had their attention? Once Lupin arrived and began to explain, Sirius could have softened. He could have spoken gently to Hermione, appealed to her rationality. She respected rules and logic, or he could have addressed Ron's fear with compassion. Instead, he let the tension build. "I did my waiting," he shouted. 12 years of it. In Azkaban! That outburst wasn't meant to enlighten anyone. It was meant to explode. The book offers subtle hints that Sirius, for all his charm, was never the most level-headed of the Marauders. James Potter was the natural leader, Lupin was the voice of reason, Peter was the follower. And Sirius, he was the fire starter, the prankster who once suggested Snape dive into a werewolf's den, the same Sirius who didn't hesitate to drag a 13-year-old into his old vendetta. He had passion, but little patience. His instincts leaned toward drama, not diplomacy. There is also the question of trust. Would Hermione and Ron have believed him, even if he had explained? Possibly not. But he never gave them the chance. He never tried. Instead of appealing to their logic, he fed their fear. Every action he took, pinning Ron, glaring at Hermione, cornering Harry, made him look more guilty, not less. He did not behave like an innocent man. He behaved like a hunted animal. The Marauders' map was already in play. Lupin had seen Pettigrew's name. This could have been proof. Sirius could have started there. "Look at the map," he might have said. "You'll see Peter." But again, silence. That crucial piece of evidence, undeniable, magical, concrete, wasn't used. It was ignored until Lupin arrived. Why? Because Sirius wasn't focused on persuasion. He was focused on revenge. And it is revenge that truly lies at the heart of this mystery. Sirius didn't just want Peter exposed, he wanted him dead, not imprisoned, not tried, dead. When Harry begged him not to kill, Sirius agreed only because it would spare Harry's soul. Otherwise, Peter would have died that night. And perhaps deep down, Sirius believed that if he could kill Peter, the truth would reveal itself in blood. It was the simplest path to redemption in his eyes, but it was also the most dangerous. The events that unfolded, Snape's intrusion, Lupin's transformation, Peter's escape, were all consequences of Sirius's silence. Had he spoken, the chain could have broken, but he did not. He trusted no one, not even Harry. He demanded belief without evidence, loyalty without explanation. That demand might have worked with James, but not with Ron and Hermione. There is irony here. The Marauders, once famed for their closeness and trust, are unraveled by mistrust and miscommunication. Sirius's failure to speak echoes the very betrayal he tried to avenge. It is a tragic loop. Silence bred suspicion, and suspicion bred disaster. Even after Peter is revealed, the damage is done. The trio is scarred, the truth nearly lost, and Peter escapes. Again. Some fans have speculated that J.K. Rowling simply needed the drama, that Sirius's behavior served the plot more than the character. This is not without merit. The scene in the Shrieking Shack is one of the most intense in the series. It crackles with tension, misdirection, and suspense, but even if crafted for effect, the choices still belong to Sirius, and they paint a portrait of a man not yet ready for redemption. It is important to remember that Sirius, for all his loyalty, was never a saint. He was brave, yes, and deeply loving, but he was also reckless, impulsive, and wounded. His love for Harry was pure, but his methods were flawed. In Azkaban he had nothing but time doesn't always bring clarity. Sometimes it sharpens the pain. When he finally stood in front of Harry, he wasn't ready to be understood. He was ready to strike. Even Dumbledore, who later supports Sirius, never fully excuses his behavior. After the incident, Sirius flees again. He writes letters, he sends owls, but he does not stay. He does not face the ministry or the world. He remains a fugitive. The man who once craved justice now seeks only escape. And that tells us something vital. Sirius never believed he could be truly free. He believed he had to run, always. And yet Sirius was right. Peter was guilty. Voldemort did return. The ministry was blind. In the end, Sirius's madness wasn't entirely madness, but it was self-defeating. His refusal to speak, left Harry vulnerable. His silence allowed Peter to slip away. His drama nearly cost lives. He was right, but he was also wrong. It is a haunting question. What if Sirius had explained? What if he had spoken plainly, gently, with reason? Would Peter have been captured? Would the Ministry have listened? Would Sirius have been cleared? Perhaps not. But the children would have understood. The truth would have come sooner. The time-turner might never have been needed. Instead, we have the Sirius Black we know, fiery, tragic, brilliant, broken. A man who loved too fiercely, trusted too little, and spoke too late. A man who let the past guide his present. A marauder who never stopped running, not just from Azkaban, but from the truth he was too angry to explain. Number 20. Why didn't the Marauders adapt the map for the Order of the Phoenix? The Marauders map is a creation that borders on genius and mischief, an artifact so potent and so cleverly enchanted that even the professors of Hogwarts failed to fully grasp its origin or break its protections. Yet for all its brilliance, the map comes with a frustrating enigma, one that has sparked debates among fans and scholars alike. Why did its creators, the self-styled Marauders, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, not leave behind any instructions? Why did they craft a masterpiece of magical cartography only to bury its secrets in riddles, vanish from history, and abandon their work without a trace of guidance? Fred and George Weasley stumbled upon the folded, nondescript parchment in Filch's confiscated drawer, a discovery that would come to define much of their Hogwarts lives. But when they first examined it, the map revealed nothing. No glow, no whisper, no flicker of intent. It was through experimentation, mischief, and perhaps sheer fate that they eventually unlocked the password, "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." This iconic phrase triggered the map's intricate charms, unveiling a living, breathing diagram of Hogwarts Castle in its entirety, complete with moving dots and names, hidden corridors, and even the elusive presence of Argus Filch's cat, Mrs. Norris. But the question lingers. If the Marauders had any intention of passing their legacy down, why not make the process simpler? Why not inscribe a tiny note in invisible ink? Perhaps something Remus might have suggested in one of his more thoughtful moods. He, after all, was the most grounded of the four. Could he not have foreseen a future where the map would be discovered and misunderstood, perhaps even misused? One could argue that the Marauders made the map solely for themselves, a private tool to navigate the forbidden corners of Hogwarts, especially given their desire to aid Remus during his monthly transformations. But if secrecy was the goal, then why didn't they destroy it after graduation? They knew Filch was sniffing around. They knew the castle's secrets were dangerous. James Potter had matured somewhat by his final year. He knew what it meant to protect, to hide something important. And yet, the map was left behind like a ghost without a purpose, waiting for someone reckless or clever enough to stir it awake. This curious absence of documentation is more than just teenage negligence. It's a narrative choice embedded with implications about legacy, trust, and perhaps the disillusionment that followed their time at Hogwarts. Sirius Black, the proud and defiant rebel, would never have imagined the map falling into Ministry hands. James, who loved the idea of a younger mischief-maker continuing his legacy, would likely have smiled at Fred and George's use of it. But it is Peter Pettigrew's involvement that casts a long shadow. A traitor among friends, a silent observer of greatness he would eventually betray. Would Peter have wanted the map to survive? Would he have helped preserve it? Or was its survival merely accidental? When Harry inherits the map from Fred and George in his third year, he too must learn its quirks without help. Messrs. Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, the map proclaims, are proud to present the Marauders' map. The tone is playful, brimming with bravado and confidence, but beyond that opening flourish, the map offers no guidance, no tutorial, no hint of how to use it beyond the activation and deactivation phrases. Harry never learns who the Marauders really were until Remus Lupin tells him much later. For years, he uses the map without knowing that his own father helped create it. The very people who could have left him a clue remained silent, as if time had erased not only their intentions, but their sense of duty to those who followed. The irony is sharp. James Potter, who died protecting his son, left behind a magical object more intimate than a photograph, one that reflected his school days, his friendships, his very personality. And yet he never ensured it would reach Harry. Sirius, who came to love Harry like a son, never once mentioned the map in his letters from Grimmauld Place. He never said, "That map? We made it, Harry." There is a silence in their legacy that is louder than words, an omission that feels almost deliberate. Perhaps the answer lies in fear. Fear that the map, if passed on with instructions, could fall into the wrong hands. Imagine Draco Malfoy discovering it, or worse, Dolores Umbridge. In Order of the Phoenix, when Umbridge tries to interrogate Harry about his activities, the map remains safely hidden. It is a fragile secret, and in the wrong hands, it becomes a weapon. The Marauders understood this. They saw the rise of Voldemort. They watched friends die and others defect. Maybe they didn't trust the future enough to risk it. Or maybe, just maybe, they didn't expect to die so young. Perhaps James believed he would one day show the map to his son himself. Perhaps Sirius thought he'd bring it out at Christmas, show it to Harry with a laugh. The tragedy of the Marauders is not just that they were mischief makers, but that they were boys in a world that forced them to grow up too fast. The map was a symbol of their youth, and when that youth was shattered, they left it behind, unfinished, unexplained, like a story with the final chapter torn out. Another angle lies in the map's personality. Yes, the map has a kind of intelligence, one that reflects its creators. It insults Severus Snape when he attempts to use it. Mr. Mooney presents his compliments to Professor Snape and begs him to keep his abnormally large nose out of other people's business. This is not a neutral tool, it is alive with their voices, their biases, their humor. Could they have believed that the right person would instinctively know how to speak to it? That only someone worthy would say, "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good," not out of imitation, but instinct? Fred and George, true heirs to the Marauders' spirit, said the phrase out of playful exploration. The map responded. It opened itself like a blooming flower, recognizing not a name, but an attitude. In that way, perhaps the Marauders left something better than instructions. They left a test, a filter. Only the truly mischievous, clever, daring, unafraid could unlock it. And yet that is romanticism. Because the truth is, even a tool of mischief needs clarity. When Harry first uses it to sneak into Hogsmeade, he's nearly caught multiple times. When he later uses it to track Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, he does not notice the name on the map, possibly because he doesn't understand how to look more deeply. The map could have revealed a hidden Death Eater in Hogwarts, and yet it failed, not because it was flawed, but because no one ever taught Harry how to use it thoroughly. Remus Lupin, upon seeing the map during the events of Prisoner of Azkaban, reacts with both nostalgia and dread. He knows what it is. He helped make it. Yet even then, he does not claim ownership, nor does he offer an explanation to Harry. He does not even reveal his identity as Moony. It is as if the Marauders all shared an unspoken oath to let the map speak for itself and remain anonymous, but anonymity is dangerous when knowledge is needed. There is, of course, the darker question. What if the Marauders themselves didn't agree on the map's future? Remus, ever cautious, might have urged secrecy. Sirius, ever brash, might have wanted it passed on. James could have been caught between pride and protection. And Peter? By the time Voldemort's shadow lengthened over the wizarding world, Peter was already slipping into betrayal. What use would he have for legacy when survival meant more? If the Marauders had truly wanted to pass their knowledge on, they could have enchanted the map with a memory. a portrait even that whispered guidance. Dumbledore did it. Even the founders left behind relics, but the Marauders left nothing but a folded piece of parchment, as if daring the next generation to guess, to try, to fail, and then succeed. And still the map endures. It survived the First Wizarding War. It lay hidden during Umbridge's reign. It never betrayed its creators, even when Severus Snape and others tried to force it. In Goblet of Fire, Moody, in reality Barty Crouch Jr., uses the map, but it is not stated whether he fully understood its mechanisms. The knowledge remains selective, as if the map itself chooses how much to reveal. What is perhaps most haunting is that the map is more than a prankster's tool. It is a record of a friendship that ended in tragedy. Each nickname etched on the surface, Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, is a reminder of the boys they were before the world broke them. Maybe they didn't leave instructions because the map wasn't meant to live beyond them. Maybe it was a secret meant to die with their youth. And yet it didn't die. It found Fred and George. It found Harry. It helped rescue Sirius, reveal Peter, monitor Draco, and more. For an object without instructions, it taught its users plenty about risk, loyalty, and consequence. Still the question remains, why not a single note? Why no record of its creation, no explanation of its enchantments? Was it arrogance, fear, sentimentality, or the simple truth that sometimes even the most brilliant minds forget to imagine a future without themselves in it? In the end, the Marauders map is a mystery wrapped in mirth. It teaches us that some legacies are not left in stone or scroll, but in the paths others carve when forced to find their way through darkness. It is perhaps the final prank of 4 boys who never planned to grow old. Number 21. Why wasn't Lupin monitored during full moons? Of all the shadows that lurked in the hallways of Hogwarts, none were as quietly unsettling as the full moon rising behind its ancient towers. On those nights when the silver glow touched the forbidden forest and brushed the Black Lake with ghostlight, a secret unfolded beneath the school, one that very few dared to question. Remus Lupin, once a marauder, now a professor, would disappear from the castle and lock himself away in the shrieking shack. Hidden from view, transformed into a creature of fangs and fury, he became the very threat he spent the month preparing to control. Yet the question hangs in the cold night air, like the howl of a distant wolf. Why did no one ever check that he had taken the wolfsbane potion? The wolfsbane potion was not merely a precaution, it was the only known substance that allowed a werewolf to retain his human mind during transformation. Without it, Lupin was no more than a wild animal, dangerous, unpredictable. A single failure to take it meant unleashing a predator into the vicinity of children. And yet there is no record of Madame Pomfrey ever confirming that he drank it. No mention of Dumbledore double-checking, not even Severus Snape, who brewed the potion himself and famously distrusted Lupin, made any move to verify its consumption. In a castle renowned for its caution, this was a silence so loud it deafened. Snape was not ignorant of the risk. He had every reason to be vigilant. He was the one brewing the wolfsbane potion, an incredibly complex concoction requiring precision and regularity. If anyone had known how easy it would have been for Lupin to forget, or skip, or even misdose, it was Snape. And yet, after slipping Lupin his monthly supply, Snape walked away. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Snape remarks, "You should know, Potter, that Professor Lupin is unable to be with us this evening. He is feeling unwell." That was the night of the full moon. Snape knew, and he said nothing more. The question grows sharper. Did anyone in the school beyond Snape and Dumbledore even know about the potion? Did McGonagall? Did Flitwick? Did any of the staff have contingency plans in case something went wrong? The answer appears to be no. The safety of hundreds of students was predicated entirely on trust in one man's sense of responsibility. Even the Marauders, known for their chaos and pranks, never once joked about a backup plan in their youth. In fact, when they discovered Remus's condition at school, their solution was not caution, but transformation. They became animagi to accompany him during his monstrous nights. That same blind loyalty, heroic though it may have seemed, was echoed years later in the Hogwarts staff's decision to look the other way. There is a chilling moment in The Prisoner of Azkaban, just after the events in the Shrieking Shack, when the trio confronts Lupin's secret. Hermione, ever the voice of reason, says, "You're a werewolf!" It is a moment of revelation for the reader, but for Lupin, it's another day spent hoping no one would ask. He confirms her accusation quietly. "How long have you known?" he asks. He is not concerned for his safety or theirs. He is only concerned with the secret being out. It speaks volumes that even in that moment, with Sirius Black present, with Peter Pettigrew at his feet, Lupin never says, "Don't worry, I've taken my potion." He assumes trust. He offers no proof. Imagine for a moment that he had forgotten. Just once. Perhaps he'd had a difficult day, a confusing schedule, a misplaced vial. In the rush of lessons and grading and staff meetings, the potion had slipped his mind. What then? Would anyone have been there to notice before it was too late? The transformation is not subtle. Bones snap, skin tears, fur erupts. It is agony, chaos, violence. And if it began in the halls instead of the shack, the walls of Hogwarts would run red. Lupin himself acknowledges the danger. When he resigns, he tells Dumbledore, "Parents will not want a werewolf teaching their children." He does not say, "I might have forgotten the potion." But the implication is there. The risk is known. The potion itself had to be taken daily for an entire week, leading up to the full moon. One missed dose nullified its effects. This detail alone should have prompted oversight. A single day's lapse, and Lupin would no longer be a man in control. He would become the beast from his nightmares. The very design of the potion demanded a check-in system, but no such system existed. Why not have Madame Pomfrey oversee his intake as she would with any student on a vital regimen? Why not have Snape verify the vial count? Was it pride, trust, or negligence? Dumbledore's trust is legendary, sometimes to a fault. He believed in second chances, in the power of remorse, in the redemptive arc of flawed individuals. He trusted Snape, a former Death Eater. He trusted Hagrid, a half-giant with a record of dangerous creatures. And he trusted Remus Lupin, a man who had never once harmed a soul intentionally. But was trust enough? At what point does faith become folly? Dumbledore was headmaster and ultimately responsible for every soul in the castle. Was it ethical to stake that safety on a werewolf's memory? The precedent for caution existed. When Sirius Black was believed to be a threat in Prisoner of Azkaban, Dementors circled the school grounds. When the Chamber of Secrets was opened, students were escorted in groups. When a troll entered the dungeon, the staff was mobilized. But when a werewolf walked the halls once a month, everyone simply trusted that he had taken a potion. Even the Marauders themselves, James, Sirius, Peter, had never questioned the danger. They romanticized it. They reveled in their nights together as animals, but none of them had lived with the aftermath of a slip. The events of that third year offer an eerie close call. When Snape discovers the invisibility cloak discarded and follows the children to the shack, he nearly becomes a casualty. Lupin, having forgotten his potion, transforms. The moment is violent. The werewolf charges into the woods, howling, mindless. Had Harry and Hermione not intervened, Snape might have died. Worse, they might have been mauled. It was a miracle that Lupin ran for the forest instead of into the school, and no one ever officially addressed the failure. No inquiry, no new protocol, just a quiet resignation. The Marauders had always operated outside the rules. Their map, their animagus forms, their exploits through the school's many secret paths, these were acts of rebellion and camaraderie. But as adults, the stakes had changed. Lupin, now a teacher, held the safety of others in his hands. The map was no longer a joke, it was a security threat. The shrieking shack was no longer a hiding place, it was a cage. But the old patterns of ignoring consequences endured. The Marauders had always relied on each other. That same reliance persisted, unexamined, long after it should have been. Severus Snape, ironically, may have been the only one who understood the danger fully. His hatred for the Marauders was personal, etched into him by years of humiliation, and yet he said nothing, even after nearly being mauled, even after risking his life to follow them to the shack. Perhaps he knew that no one would listen, perhaps he assumed the risk was part of Dumbledore's grand plan, or perhaps for all his bitterness, Snape still believed that Lupin wouldn't slip. But belief is not a safeguard. It is not a lock on a door. The wizarding world had its prejudices. Werewolves were outcasts, feared and despised. Lupin spent his life hiding his condition. Every job he applied for rejected him. Hogwarts was his one sanctuary. That fragility may have made others hesitant to probe too deeply. To question whether he took his potion might have felt like an insult, but it should have been standard, the same way wands are checked before entering the ministry, the same way portkeys are monitored. Security is not a matter of politeness, it is a matter of planning. One might argue that Lupin's impeccable record spoke for itself. He had never harmed anyone. He had taken the potion diligently for months. His resignation was voluntary. But precedent is a poor substitute for preparedness. The world does not operate on the assumption that good people never make mistakes. The Hogwarts staff should have had a checklist, a verification system, anything. Instead, they had a man with a quiet voice and a kind smile and a vial in his pocket. The tragedy lies in the fact that Lupin himself would likely have welcomed oversight. He was not proud, he was not careless. He understood better than anyone the stakes. He knew the pain of isolation. He bore the weight of his condition every day. A system of checks might have embarrassed him, but it would have protected others. And that was all he ever wanted. To belong, to be safe, to keep others safe from him. In the end, the silence is what condemns them. Not a single adult voice asked the question aloud. Not once in the entire year. The students were unaware, the staff was passive, and the risk, ever present, tangible, was never named. Lupin resigned not because of what happened, but because of what could have happened, because no one could guarantee that the next full moon wouldn't end in blood. The Marauders had always been bound by secrets, the map, the transformations, the unspoken pact of loyalty. But secrets are only romantic when they don't endanger others. The moment Lupin became a teacher, his secrets required oversight. His friends were not there to protect him anymore, and the staff, blind with trust or dulled by habit, failed him and almost failed the students. Remus Lupin was a brilliant professor, a kind man, a survivor. He was not the problem. The problem was that no one bothered to ask the inconvenient question, the kind of question that seems rude until the night it saves a life. The question that echoes, still unanswered, who checked the wolfsbane, and why, in a castle full of wise and wary minds, was trust allowed to stand alone? Number 22. Why didn't Dumbledore tell Harry who Lupin was from the start? The Hogwarts Express had barely pulled into the station before the shadow of Professor Remus Lupin began to shape the tone of Harry Potter's third year. He entered the narrative shrouded in ambiguity, sleeping in a tattered cloak, distant from the excitement and cheer of the other adults. It is a peculiar choice by Dumbledore, a headmaster known for anticipating consequences like a master chess player, to let this reunion unfold in silence. Remus John Lupin, once one of James Potter's dearest friends, was now a complete stranger to James's son. The boy who longed for connections to his past was unknowingly seated just feet away from someone who could have offered him exactly that. But Dumbledore said nothing. Dumbledore had never been careless. He hand-picked Lupin as the new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, a role plagued by a different disaster each year. He trusted Lupin's moral compass, his calm demeanour, and perhaps most significantly, his shared history with Harry's parents. The silence, then, wasn't neglect, it was deliberate. Yet the silence became a wall. Instead of opening the door to Harry's heritage, Dumbledore chose to keep it shut for reasons cloaked in mystery. This decision left Lupin awkwardly navigating their early relationship, while withholding truths that could have instantly changed the nature of their bond. Harry's first true impression of Lupin wasn't through the lens of familial warmth, but as a capable adult protecting him from the chilling terror of a Dementor. Professor Lupin gave Harry a piece of chocolate and told him to eat it. It was the best thing Harry had ever tasted. A moment of comfort, yes, but not one of recognition. The man who had raced through the Forbidden Forest with James, who had laughed with Lily on the Hogwarts lawn, was just a weary professor to Harry. Would it have hurt to say, "He was your father's friend"? This quiet introduction stands in sharp contrast to how Dumbledore handled Sirius Black. The headmaster took great care to control the information surrounding Sirius's escape from Azkaban. When the time came, he allowed Snape to rant and rage, but he personally oversaw the endgame, ensuring Harry understood who Sirius truly was. With Lupin, however, the approach was muted, as though Lupin's presence needed to be hidden, even from the one person it might have healed most. It wasn't just about sentiment. Harry was 13. He had grown up starved of real knowledge about his parents. His guardians never spoke their names aloud, and yet Dumbledore, who had been entrusted with the boy's protection and emotional growth, chose not to facilitate one of the most natural and potentially enriching introductions of Harry's adolescence. There was no, "This man once held you as a baby." No, he was your father's brother in spirit. Only silence. In the third book, The Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry's discovery of the truth is piecemeal. He finds out about the Marauders, but only later. He realizes Lupin was one of them after an intense and dangerous night involving Sirius Black, Peter Pettigrew, and a werewolf transformation. The way it happens is chaotic. There's no time for reflection or warmth. "I thought he was my friend," Harry says of Lupin in anger, unsure whether to believe what others accuse Lupin of being. A dark moment born not of truth, but of secrets. Lupin himself is reluctant to share, but this reluctance is learned. He had been marked by shame, by secrets, by a lifetime of hiding his condition as a werewolf. Dumbledore, more than anyone, understood how Lupin operated. He knew Lupin wouldn't speak unless invited to, and yet he placed him in front of Harry without guidance, without framing. A missed opportunity that could have healed two souls at once. Why did Dumbledore stay silent? Was it strategy? Was he afraid Lupin's condition would cause suspicion? Or was it his endless fascination with fate, that belief that timing is everything and answers must come when they are meant to? I make mistakes like the next man, in fact being, forgive me, rather cleverer than most men. My mistakes tend to be correspondingly huger, Dumbledore admits later, in Half-Blood Prince. Was this one of them? It was certainly not the only time Dumbledore withheld truth from Harry. He kept the prophecy from him for years. He delayed telling him about the Horcruxes. He even avoided revealing the full story of Snape's loyalties. But those secrets had elements of danger. In Lupin's case, the only risk was honesty, a chance to say, "This man loved your parents, he loved you." Lupin himself tried to bridge the gap. In their lessons against Dementors, there was care in his tone, patience in his voice. He gave Harry what no other professor had, the tools to defend himself, not just physically, but emotionally. "You're not weak," Lupin says when Harry struggles. "The Dementors affect you worse than the others because there are horrors in your past that the others don't have." A line filled with compassion. But even then no confession followed, no moment of "I remember that night." Just more silence. The Marauders were not minor characters. They were central to the history Harry so desperately tried to piece together. James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew had once roamed the same castle hallways. 3 of them were still alive. 2 were in Hogwarts by mid-year. And yet, Dumbledore made no effort to tell Harry this. The Marauders' legacy, rich with mischief, loyalty, betrayal, and courage, remained buried until Harry had to uncover it on his own. In the Shrieking Shack, no less, with lives at risk. It's notable that Dumbledore did not even inform McGonagall, his trusted deputy, of the full details surrounding Lupin and Sirius. She reacts with visible shock when Lupin resigns. "That man's never been a danger to a soul in this school," she says, defending him in the face of public outrage. If even McGonagall was kept in the dark, what does that say about Dumbledore's strategy? Perhaps he feared what prejudice might surface, even among the staff. Perhaps he wanted Harry to reach conclusions on his own, but was that fair? What's more, Lupin's presence at Hogwarts could have been a perfect segue into conversations about Lily, a character always overshadowed by James in the early books. Lupin admired Lily's intelligence, her kindness, and her willingness to see past his condition. He had seen her in action, not just in memory. That insight could have balanced Harry's perspective, enriching his view of both parents. But Dumbledore withheld the key that could unlock those stories. The omission becomes more frustrating when considering how Harry responds to familial connection. His relationship with Sirius blossoms almost instantly once he learns the truth. He clings to Hagrid's every word when it concerns his parents. He treasures photographs, letters, anything that proves his parents were real and loved. To deny him access to someone who had laughed with James and Lily feels, if not cruel, then needlessly reserved. There's also the emotional burden it placed on Lupin. A man already burdened by isolation and shame now had to suppress every instinct to reach out to Harry. He had to teach the boy without revealing too much. Imagine the pain of watching the child of your best friend grow up, recognizing the curve of the jaw, the fire in the eyes, and saying nothing. "Your eyes are your mother's," Lupin tells Harry, late in Order of the Phoenix. But how many times did he notice it and bite his tongue? Even the Marauders' map is a symbol of this fractured truth. When Fred and George give it to Harry, it's a magical act of rebellion, but the map is also a secret document made by his father and his father's friends. The fact that Harry learns its origin not from Dumbledore or Lupin, but through a confrontation in a shack filled with danger, is telling. Dumbledore could have offered the map as a gift, as a bridge. Instead, it became another secret stumbled upon. Harry's 3rd year was the calm before the storm. Voldemort had not yet returned. It was a time when the deepest wounds could have been explored in safety. Instead, the emotional growth that could have happened through honest conversation was delayed. Lupin resigns, vanishes again from Harry's life, and when they next meet, the war is almost upon them. In retrospect, Dumbledore's silence created a pattern, withholding, delaying, postponing truth until it exploded under pressure. The meeting of Harry and Lupin was another link in that chain, another moment when a simple act of connection was sacrificed for reasons never fully explained. The result? A bond that could have been strong from day one had to be rebuilt, slowly, painfully, and under the weight of loss. It's easy to romanticize Dumbledore's wisdom, to see him as the great orchestrator, but in this instance his restraint feels less like strategy and more like stubbornness. It's one thing to protect a child from dark magic, it's another to protect him from his own history that could have been shared, embraced, and cherished through Lupin's gentle recollections. In the end, Lupin remains one of Harry's great mentors, but the start of their relationship is a haunting reminder of how Dumbledore's choices, his devotion to mystery and timing, sometimes came at a cost. A cost paid not in spells or blood, but in missed moments, buried truths, and the quiet ache of what might have been. Number 23. Why didn't the Marauders stop Sirius from endangering Snape? Sirius Black was many things, charming, brilliant, defiant, but on that fateful night, he became something far more dangerous, reckless. It was not merely a prank. Telling Severus Snape how to reach the Whomping Willow's secret passageway during a full moon was a deliberate act with a chilling edge. If James Potter had not intervened at the last second, Severus would have walked into a room with a fully transformed werewolf. That werewolf was Remus Lupin. And while Remus would never have harmed Severus in his right mind, the wolf had no such moral restraint. The Marauders, Sirius, James, Remus, and Peter Pettigrew, were inseparable. Yet in this moment of horrifying consequence, that bond fractured under the weight of one unforgivable choice. Sirius knew the stakes. He had known for years about Remus's condition, and he was one of the few entrusted with the terrifying truth. The boys had worked together to become animagi precisely to protect their friend and to share in his monthly ordeal. That they succeeded in this complex magical feat at such a young age speaks to their intelligence and dedication, but it also reveals something else. They were never unaware of what Remus became. They knew the danger. Sirius, most of all, could not plead ignorance. Sending someone unprepared, someone with no means of defending himself, into that scenario was not a miscalculation. It was a conscious decision to place a life at risk, to play with death as if it were a toy. James Potter, to his credit, did not let the act reach its bloody conclusion. At the last moment, he stopped Severus and saved him from what would have been a traumatic and possibly fatal encounter. Yet even James's heroic act raises questions. How much did he know beforehand? Did Sirius hint at the plan, boast of it, or whisper it between classes with a grin? Was there a moment when James could have intervened earlier, when a word or look could have stopped Sirius from acting on his darkest impulse? The books remain silent on this. We know only that James saved Snape, and Snape in turn owed him a life debt he never wanted. Remus Lupin himself was nowhere near in control during that full moon. But what did he know afterward? He admits in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Sirius thought it would be amusing to tell Snape how to get in past the Whomping Willow. Remus knew. And more importantly, he kept the secret. He tells Harry years later with guilt in his voice, "I sometimes felt guilty that I had not told Dumbledore. I was afraid that if I did, he would insist on Sirius being expelled." This fear, this selfish preservation of friendship, meant protecting Sirius over justice, over Snape's safety, and over truth. Remus may not have been awake during the act, but he was complicit in the silence that followed. Peter Pettigrew, ever the shadow in the Marauder Quartet, is rarely mentioned in the context of this event. Yet his silence is perhaps the most telling. Peter was the sort of person who followed those he admired, rarely leading, never questioning. He most certainly knew of the prank afterward, and likely before. He did nothing. Not out of malice, but cowardice. And in many ways, cowardice is the root that allows cruelty to thrive. The Marauders' silence, James's delayed intervention, Remus's post-factum guilt, Peter's inaction, all converged to shield Sirius from consequences he richly deserved. Even Albus Dumbledore, the great protector and observer, appeared to overlook the gravity of this incident. He knew of the event. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore reminds Snape of that night, using it to explain the life debt. But he never expelled Sirius. He never punished Remus for his silence. Perhaps he believed James's intervention balanced the scales. Or perhaps he, too, underestimated the cruelty masked beneath Sirius's charm. For all his wisdom, Dumbledore often failed to see what children hid behind their brilliance and potential. The Marauders' friendship was celebrated for years, a model of loyalty and brotherhood, but the Whomping Willow incident paints a different picture. It reveals a brotherhood that, while tight-knit, harboured rot at its core. Sirius's prank was not born of simple rivalry. It was laced with hatred. Severus Snape, for all his faults, was not a threat to Sirius. He was a target of Sirius's contempt, a scapegoat for frustrations, and an object of cruelty. That Sirius would consider placing him in mortal danger for a laugh speaks volumes, and that his friends either protected him or remained silent suggests that the bonds of friendship were prioritized over moral responsibility. Snape himself never forgot. His hatred for Sirius and James only deepened, and one cannot blame him. In the Order of the Phoenix, Snape's fury boils over when he is forced to interact with Sirius again. "Keep your nose out of it, Potter, or I'll make sure it stays out," he spits at Harry, still seething over ancient betrayals. The trauma of that night, of nearly being murdered by a creature he didn't understand, of being dragged into the Marauders' secrets, never left him. It formed a foundation for the bitterness and resentment that shaped his life, and it was never addressed. There's a disturbing trend in how the Marauders' actions were treated. Their pranks were often seen as harmless, yet this was not a prank. It was a murder attempt, or at the very least manslaughter waiting to happen. The term "boys will be boys" is often invoked to dismiss such behavior. But what Sirius did went beyond recklessness. It danced at the edge of premeditated cruelty. And what's worse is that no one, at the time, treated it as such. Remus's role is perhaps the most tragic. As a werewolf, he lived a life of shame and secrecy. The Marauders gave him companionship and inclusion, but that inclusion came at a cost. He was always grateful, too grateful. So grateful, in fact, that he excused their worst behavior. "I was afraid," he confesses to Harry, "afraid of losing what I had." This fear kept him silent, even when he knew Sirius had crossed a line. In many ways, Remus's silence was the most heartbreaking. It wasn't born of cruelty, but of desperation. There is also the matter of James's transformation. Many point to this incident as a turning point in his maturity. After this, James allegedly began to change. He became head boy. He began to treat Lily Evans with more respect. He grew up. But does that retroactive growth erase what nearly happened? Does one act of heroism outweigh the preceding apathy? James's intervention was right, but it was also reactive. He stopped the monster his friend unleashed, but he didn't stop the friend from unleashing it. That difference matters. The group dynamic of the Marauders allowed darkness to flourish in the guise of camaraderie. Each boy played a role. Sirius, the charismatic firebrand; James, the noble leader; Remus, the quiet observer; Peter, the sycophantic follower. But in moments like these, the mask slipped. Sirius was dangerously impulsive. James was loyal but slow to act. Remus was afraid, and Peter was useless. Together they became a unit that enabled one another. Accountability vanished in the warmth of shared secrets. Severus Snape's later cruelty, his bitterness, even his allegiance to Voldemort, cannot be separated from this trauma. When people ask how a boy as brilliant as Snape ended up making such dark choices, they often ignore the humiliation, bullying, and attempted murder he experienced at the hands of his peers. This event, this prank, was a tipping point. It marked the moment when school rivalries crossed into irreversible hatred, and that hatred shaped the entire Second Wizarding War. Years later, the Marauders would each meet tragic ends. James was murdered. Sirius was imprisoned for crimes he didn't commit. Peter betrayed them all. Remus was left alone, bearing the weight of all their ghosts, but none of their deaths erased what had been done. None of them fully atoned. Their legacies are forever stained by what they allowed to happen to Severus Snape. Even in the Deathly Hallows, when Harry names his son after Severus and calls him the bravest man I ever knew, he never speaks of this moment. The past is conveniently buried, but the scars remain. Lupin's guilt, Sirius's arrogance, James's silence, Peter's cowardice, they all culminated in that one night under the full moon. It was a moment that should have shattered their illusion of innocence. Instead, it was tucked away, locked in the memories of those who could never forget. The Marauders are not villains, but neither are they spotless heroes. They were boys given too much power and too little supervision. They were adored, admired, even worshipped by their peers. But in the shadows of that admiration they failed a fundamental test of character. When a friend plotted something vile, no one stopped him, no one said, "This is too far." And so, it happened. What's perhaps most haunting is that this incident was never addressed properly in canon. We know of it through fragments, through confessions, and the bitterness in Snape's eyes. We're told it was a mistake, a joke, a thing of the past. But the impact was enormous. It was the moment when the Marauders stopped being boys and became something else, flawed, fractured, and dangerous. The shame of that night never quite leaves the story. There's an uncomfortable truth buried in the Marauders' legend. Their friendship was built not just on loyalty and adventure, but on shared secrecy and dangerous games. The Whomping Willow incident is not an outlier. It is a lens. It shows us who they were when no one was watching, and what it reveals is not easy to forgive, not for Snape, not for us. And still, despite everything, Severus Snape protected Harry Potter for years. He kept his word. He honored a life debt born of that terrible night. It is perhaps the greatest irony that the boy they tormented became the man who saved the son of his tormentors. That he did so without recognition, without thanks, and under constant suspicion only deepens the weight of what the Marauders allowed to happen. Their silence echoes louder than their laughter ever did. Number 24, why didn't Pettigrew run away earlier? Peter Pettigrew's prolonged stay at Hogwarts, hidden in plain sight, raises a troubling question that few dare to ask. Why didn't he flee earlier, especially with the Marauders' map still functioning? For 12 years he lived as Scabbers, Ron Weasley's pet rat, scuttling through corridors, sleeping in the Gryffindor dormitory, and nesting in pockets, all while his name, Peter Pettigrew, flickered on the map that he himself helped to create. It is this point that renders his delay so inexplicable, because if the map still worked, and if he knew it might fall into the wrong hands, why risk staying? Why didn't he run when the first danger of discovery appeared? One cannot overstate how personal the Marauders' map was to Pettigrew. It bore the mocking flourish of 4 signatures: Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. Messrs. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, purveyors of aids to magical mischief makers, are proud to present the Marauders' map. He was Wormtail. This wasn't just a magical tool, it was part of his own past, bound up in the boyhood memories he had long tried to bury. And yet, as Scabbers, he lived among students who might rediscover it at any moment. The Weasley twins already had. Fred and George had found the map and used it for years. This wasn't a forgotten relic in a vault, it was active. Fred even handed it to Harry, saying, "We've decided we don't need it anymore. You can use it to sneak into Hogsmeade." Pettigrew must have noticed. So what was he thinking during that time? Each time the map unfolded and the ink blossomed into the twisting corridors of Hogwarts, Peter's name would have appeared, moving, scuttling, often near Ron. Did he know that? Was he capable of guessing that his old creation was once again alive and dangerous to him? If he had, would he not have run the instant the map became a threat? It is almost unbearable to imagine how close he came to being revealed during every casual glance at that parchment. Harry Potter, for instance, noticed Peter's name during a cold night in the Gryffindor common room. "He's right there," Harry thought, confused, when he saw the name Peter Pettigrew walking toward Ron's bed. But Peter, incredibly, survived that night because Harry dismissed it as a glitch. This raises the possibility that Pettigrew didn't know the map was in use again. Perhaps he believed it was lost forever or destroyed, as so many magical items were in the First War. He might have assumed that none of the Marauders had passed it on. After all, James Potter was dead. Sirius Black was in Azkaban. Remus Lupin was wandering in obscurity. Perhaps he comforted himself with the delusion that no student, not even Harry, could ever access something so uniquely theirs. And if so, that belief would have made him reckless. He would have believed himself invisible. But Peter was not an idiot. A coward, yes, but not a fool. He had survived by caution, by hiding, by understanding the threat level in any given room. He faked his death with surgical precision, leaving behind a finger as proof. He had the cunning to frame Sirius Black for murder and vanish into obscurity. This is not the work of someone careless, so if the Marauders map was circulating again, wouldn't he have sensed it, heard whispers, seen Fred and George snickering with their private knowledge, even overheard something from Ron? Hogwarts was not a fortress of silence. Perhaps the answer lies in the strange psychology of prey. Over the years, Peter became the rat. He didn't just play the part, he internalized it. He adapted to smallness, to twitching, to fear. He stopped thinking like a wizard. Living as Scabbers made him think like Scabbers. The longer he stayed in that form, the more detached he became from the human instincts of self-preservation through foresight. Rats do not anticipate maps. They do not consider legacy or magic. They scurry and freeze. He was no longer strategizing. He was surviving minute to minute. And yet, even within that fear, there had to be moments when the human mind peeked through. When Percy Weasley held him up to complain. When Crookshanks the cat stalked him obsessively. When Ron waved him around during defense against the dark arts lessons. Did he flinch when Remus Lupin returned as a professor? Did something inside him shriek in warning when he saw the familiar, prematurely lined face of the werewolf who once laughed at his jokes? Remus, he must have thought, would know. And he was right. Lupin did suspect something. The map never lies, Lupin later told Harry. Then why did Peter stay? Some argue he was trapped. He had become dependent on the protection that the Weasley family, unknowingly, offered him. He was always underfoot but never questioned. A rat in a magical family in a magical school provided the perfect cover. Where else could he have gone that was safer? Outside Hogwarts, the wizarding world was changing. Voldemort was still gone, but his followers were waking up. There were whispers in Knockturn Alley, whispers that a Dark Lord might rise again. If Peter had fled Hogwarts, where would he have hidden? Alone, penniless, hunted by Death Eaters and Aurors alike. At least in Gryffindor Tower, he had food, heat, and innocence on his side. Who would suspect a child's pet? Still, the flaw in that logic is fatal, because Peter's very safety depended on not being seen. The map shattered that illusion. Its magic revealed truth, regardless of shape-shifting or animagus disguises. The enchantment saw through lies. It showed names. The map never lies. So if Peter had even a flicker of concern, why didn't he flee the moment he sensed the map was back in circulation? Maybe he hoped no one would notice. He might have counted on Ron never using it, or Harry not understanding what he saw. It worked for a time. When Harry first saw the name, he thought it was a mistake. Must be a ghost, he reasoned. It took Lupin, an original creator, to understand the map's implications. Peter's gamble had worked, until it didn't. There's another possibility, darker and more disturbing. What if Peter wanted to be caught on some level? Guilt is a corrosive thing. 12 years of sleeping in school bags, listening to talk of his own heroic death, hearing Sirius Black slandered as a traitor, these things could have worn at his nerves. Maybe he longed to be found, not punished, but revealed. A cry for help buried in a coward's shell. Perhaps that's why he didn't mask his name with polyjuice or illusions. He could have. There are spells, charms, ways to conceal magical signatures, but he did nothing, and that silence is telling. Even the way he is finally revealed feels almost theatrical. a dramatic reunion in the Shrieking Shack. Lupin, Sirius, Harry, Ron, Hermione, all gathered in a single room. The truth explodes like a spell. "Then you should have died," Sirius shouts when Peter begs for mercy. "Died rather than betray your friends as we would have done for you." And Peter shrinks, trembling, exposed, not just a traitor, but a coward who could have run, but didn't, who could have hidden but chose instead to linger on the edge of catastrophe, hoping it would pass him by. He could have brewed polyjuice in a hidden nook of the dungeons like Barty Crouch Jr. did. He could have altered the magic of the map, perhaps using a charm to obscure animagus names, if not as Scabbers, then as some other creature. He could have disappeared into the Forbidden Forest. He had options, but his choice was inaction, paralysis, the long, slow crawl toward exposure. And in that lies his final betrayal, not just of his friends, but of himself. Even Snape, who despised James and Sirius, recognized the enormity of Peter's survival. When he learned the truth, his eyes blazed with fury, not because he loved Potter, but because he hated lies. "It must be Pettigrew," he said. "It must be the rat." The entire castle seemed to exhale in shock. He had been there the whole time. And so we are left with the map, a parchment created in mischief, now turned into an instrument of justice. It saw what no one else could. It whispered secrets that Peter had prayed would remain buried. It showed the truth, and Peter's fatal mistake was believing that truth could be ignored. Even now, rereading those chapters, one feels the tension crackling in every hallway. The map was a silent hunter, a snare Peter had laid himself, and then forgotten. Perhaps that is the final irony, that the very magic he helped create was what eventually doomed him. A name on a piece of parchment glowing in steady ink, Peter Pettigrew, walking or watching, waiting, and never once disappearing. That is the cost of cowardice, not in running, but in staying too long. Number 25. Why did Dumbledore hire a werewolf to teach defense? In the quiet chill of a September evening, when the shadows of Hogwarts grew long and the moon traced pale silver over the Black Lake, a new defense against the dark arts professor crossed the threshold of the castle, a man with a worn suitcase, a tattered cloak, and eyes full of secrets. Remus Lupin had returned to the school of his youth, not as a student, nor as a marauder plotting midnight mischief, but as a teacher. He was kind, intelligent, deeply understanding, and cursed. The most unsettling truth was not hidden beneath his threadbare sleeves, but in his blood. He was a werewolf, and Albus Dumbledore had known it. In Remus's 4th year at Hogwarts, Dumbledore had personally orchestrated a delicate system to hide his transformations. The whomping willow, a brutal tree that mauled anything in reach, had been planted to conceal a passage to the Shrieking Shack, a place where young Lupin could transform in secret. Wolfsbane potion did not yet exist. The headmaster had taken a risk then, a quiet gamble in favor of compassion, and he took another years later when he entrusted Remus with the safety and education of hundreds of students. The position of defense against the dark arts professor had by that time become a revolving door of misfortune. Since the day Tom Riddle was denied the post, it had been cursed. No teacher held the role longer than a year. Dumbledore had seen Lockhart fail spectacularly, Quirrell succumb to the influence of Voldemort, and the curriculum grow dangerously thin. So in 1993, when a new term loomed and threats stirred in the wind, the headmaster chose Remus Lupin, a man marked by both affliction and extraordinary capability. But why him? Why during one of the most fragile years at Hogwarts? When Sirius Black had escaped Azkaban and was rumoured to be hunting Harry Potter, would Dumbledore place a werewolf in charge of the very subject that demanded clarity of mind, strength of will, and unwavering control? Lupin was undeniably gifted. He was among the most capable defense professors the school had seen. Within weeks, he had reintroduced real practical knowledge to the classroom. Students no longer sat through ridiculous lectures or fraudulent tales of heroism. They faced boggarts, they studied redcaps and grindylows, they learned how to protect themselves, not through theory, but through experience. He gave Neville Longbottom confidence by teaching him to defeat a boggart. He restored trust in the curriculum. Yet the risk was never theoretical. Each month, under the full moon, Lupin transformed. Even with the wolfsbane potion, a bitter brew invented by Damocles Belby and administered by Snape with barely concealed loathing, he was vulnerable. The potion did not strip the transformation itself. It merely preserved the human mind within the beast. But what if it failed? What if the potion was sabotaged or missed? What if, during one moonlit night, the barrier between man and monster crumbled? And one night it did. In the final days of the school year, Snape, driven by fury and prejudice, exposed Remus's condition to the entire school. Lupin, who had been teaching calmly that very week, was forced to resign in disgrace. But before that moment of shame, the real danger had already surfaced. On the night Sirius Black and Peter Pettigrew faced each other in the Shrieking Shack, Lupin had forgotten his potion. His transformation was violent, uncontrolled. "Run!" he told Harry, Hermione, and Ron. But the moment had already slipped from his grasp. In the span of minutes, a trusted teacher had become a creature of instinct and savagery. It was only luck and the intervention of others that prevented tragedy. No child was harmed, but they could have been. What if Harry had been alone? What if Remus had turned on the students in the corridors? Would we still call Dumbledore's decision noble? It's tempting to view Dumbledore's act as one of mercy, offering a man rejected by society a second chance. The headmaster had long been known for seeing the good in others. He had protected Hagrid after his expulsion. He had given Severus Snape, a former Death Eater, sanctuary and purpose. But those decisions, however controversial, had not directly endangered the students on a monthly basis. The Marauders themselves, Sirius, James, Peter, and Remus, had understood what he was long before the rest of the school. They had chosen to become animagi illegally, risking permanent injury to keep their friend company during the full moon. Even they had acknowledged the danger. The charm of Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs masked a grim truth. Their friendship had been forged in the shadow of blood and bone. The transformations were real, the pain was constant, the risk always present. Remus had lived in hiding after school, shunned by employers and landlords. The stigma of lycanthropy followed him like a second curse. Dumbledore's offer was not only a lifeline, it was a chance to stand before the world as a respected wizard. "Dumbledore's trusting me to be here," he told Harry, "and I can't risk it by being careless." That trust was both a gift and a burden. Could he carry it? Could any man? It was not a question of Remus's character. His dedication, his warmth, his humility, all were genuine. He loved his students, he respected them. But was love enough? Could affection and integrity counter the savage pulse of a curse that had no cure? The wizarding world had never been kind to werewolves. Legislation prevented them from holding most jobs. They were required to register with the ministry, branded with magical identifiers. Even wolfsbane was expensive and not widely distributed. Dumbledore's decision in this light appears as quiet defiance against institutional cruelty. He was pushing back against fear and ignorance. But Hogwarts was not a political battleground. It was a school, a sanctuary for children. Should it have been the stage for such a dangerous experiment? Perhaps Dumbledore believed that education was more than books and spells. Perhaps he thought that students needed to see that monsters, too, could be human, that those cast out could be the most worthy of trust. In Lupin, students saw not a threat, but a mentor. He was the first adult to truly listen to Neville. He understood Harry's pain. He taught Hermione to act without fear. And still, the full moon came. There was no contingency plan, no magical fail-safe, no protective charm that could hold him if something went wrong. Snape, despite his hatred, was the only barrier between safety and catastrophe, and he was neither neutral nor benevolent. In fact, Snape's anger at Lupin had little to do with the man himself. It was rooted in old wounds, pranks gone too far, and the memory of James Potter's cruelty. That Dumbledore would entrust Snape with such a vital role, brewing a delicate, life-altering potion each month, while knowing his bias, seems almost reckless. The two men could barely speak without venom. Lupin too proud to ask for pity. Snape too bitter to offer kindness. And between them, the fate of an entire school teetered each lunar cycle. When the truth was revealed, public outcry followed. Parents demanded explanations. The Daily Prophet cast dark insinuations. "Werewolf at Hogwarts," the headlines read, dripping with hysteria. Lupin left quietly, without a fight. He understood. He always had, but the question lingered in the silence that followed. Was Dumbledore wrong? Some say that courage lies in trusting the outcast. Others argue that true leadership demands protection first, ideals second. Dumbledore had long played a dangerous game with fate, from his manipulation of Harry's path, to his tolerance of dangerous professors, to his silence on the prophecy. His brilliance was undeniable, but his morality? Often murky. Harry adored Lupin. That much was clear. He looked up to him not just as a professor, but as a link to the past, the father figure he barely knew. Lupin spoke of James with gentleness. He gave Harry insight into the life his parents had lived, their jokes, their bravery, their flaws. In this, perhaps, Dumbledore saw value. That connection was sacred, a bond formed not just through blood, but through memory. Still, memories did not keep students safe, and love, however strong, did not anchor the moon. The events of that year, the confrontation with Black and Pettigrew, the escape, the transformation, all pointed to the fragility of Lupin's position. He had been a brilliant teacher, but he was also a ticking clock. Dumbledore, for all his wisdom, had gambled with lives, and though no blood was spilled, the risk had been real. If another headmaster had made the same choice, would the wizarding world have forgiven it? Would the parents of Hogwarts have tolerated such danger? Or did Dumbledore's legacy, his aura of infallibility, shield him from scrutiny? In the end, Lupin disappeared from the corridors. His office emptied, the classroom, once filled with warmth and laughter, turned cold again. Another year, another vacancy. The curse remained, but more than that, a question remained. Did the students learn to fight the dark arts? Yes. Did they learn empathy, strength, and courage? Undoubtedly, but were they ever truly safe? When the full moon rose over the forbidden forest and howls echoed across the darkened hills, the walls of Hogwarts, ancient and proud, held their breath. One man had believed in the goodness of a cursed soul. Another had trusted himself to contain the storm. And the children, oblivious to the depth of danger, slept in their beds, dreaming of spells and stories, unaware of how close they had come to waking in terror.